Jordan Peterson, Elon Musk struck me as smart people, and they didn't strike me as suckers. The societies that are not oppressing other people, it's usually not because they're too good to do it. It's because they're too weak to do it. And as soon as they get the power to do it, they would.
So, Professor Huemer, I can't resist. Who do you think is going to win the 2024 elections?
Uh, I mean, the odds are about 50-50, right? I guess I would give a slight edge to Kamala Harris. And partly because there was a recent like the latest poll from Iowa that showed that she was ahead of Trump in that state, which Trump won in the previous two elections. So if that's true, then she's going to win.
Okay. So, um, before introducing the latest book you've written, that if some were to read it, might think you are not supporting Kamala this election cycle, progressive myths.
Yeah.
Um, I wanted to ask you what you think about Trump.
Oh, many negative things. I mean, like there could be a big list of things I don't like about him. Um, like he thinks that we have invisible airplanes. So, and I, not that that's such a bad thing. Like, okay, if we had invisible airplanes, great. But like, what, what does your level of understanding have to be if you think that the military has literally invisible airplanes? Okay, right? Like, there's just like a bunch of dumb things that he said, but that's not really the main thing. The main problem that I have with him is that he literally tried to steal an election. Like, he did the literally, like, I'm not exaggerating, like the thing that they would do in third world countries, like he got voted out, and he actually made a serious concerted effort to not leave office. And I'm not just talking about him saying stuff. I'm not just tweeting stuff or like, say, oh, the election was rigged or whatever. No, he actually tried to not leave. Right. So like, calling up secretaries of state in other states and trying to get them to falsify the vote count, calling up, state legislatures and pressuring them not to accept the electoral outcome, and then organizing these slates of fake electors to make fake election certificates and trying to get Mike Pence to count the fake election certificates and pretend that they were real. Okay, so like this isn't just a bunch of talk, right? This like, and I have to emphasize that because like when I say this stuff about not accepting election outcomes, like you know, then Republicans say, oh, but Hillary Clinton said that Trump wasn't a legitimate president, so she doesn't accept election outcomes either. No, Hillary Clinton did not try to actually take office, right? Like after losing the election, right? And and they say, oh, well, like President Kennedy back in the 1960s, whatever it was, like he organized fake electors. There was a dispute about the count in Hawaii, I guess. Okay, but no, like first of all, there was a real dispute. He wasn't just making stuff up because he wanted to win. Okay. Which is shown by the fact that on the recount, Kennedy won Hawaii. Second, like he had won the election anyway, even without Hawaii. And he was not trying to reverse the election outcome, right? And he did not like pressure the vice president to count fake votes or anything like this. He didn't have this like months long plan to take over the election. Okay. So anyway, that's the worst thing that any American president has done. Right. Because like, if stuff like that is happening, then like, it's not the end of democracy yet, but if stuff like that happens regularly, then that's the end of democracy.
What do you make about the people who say that actually the guardrails held and
Yeah.
you know because the institutions are so strong, actually even if Trump really did attempt to remain in power, that this is not going to happen in a second term, and it shouldn't be one of the main problems.
Well, yeah, I mean, I have an analogy which I posted on my blog that, like you're in a bus, right? Driving up this winding mountain road, and you see the bus driver just take the wheel and swing it to the side and like crash into the railing on the side of the road. And like luckily the guardrail holds, right? boom. She's like, he keeps trying to throw the bus off the cliff. But luckily the guardrails are there, right? So then at the end of the trip, you go, wow, that was a great bus driver, right? I mean, yeah, sure, he tried to drive us off a cliff, but there are guardrails, so there's nothing to worry about. So let's hire him again. The rest of his driving was okay. So let's hire him again to drive us somewhere.
Mm.
And, and what's the problem? The problem, like, that's not the only bad thing that a bus driver can do. And a guy who would do that, you can't trust. And so, like, even if the next trip doesn't involve a winding mountain road and a cliff, you can't trust that guy because you don't know what he will do. You don't know what will happen. Like, what other things will you encounter that he might do something insane with, right? Maybe next time you'll like crash into another bus or whatever. Okay. And so, and then, about the institutions being strong. Well, fortunately, American institutions are pretty good, right? They are pretty robust, but he is working at weakening them and undermining them, like putting his own people in power. So, like if you look at the last Supreme Court decision on the immunity ruling, um, that's a pretty serious erosion of like liberal democratic norms, right? Like, they there's a point where, Justice Jackson was saying like, okay, so according to this, well, she's questioning the Trump lawyers, but she also like put this in her dissent, like, oh, so like according to your position, that the president could order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate his political opponent, and that wouldn't be a crime. Like, it's a crime, but he's immune from prosecution for it. Like,
Mhm.
I don't know, like this, like it's hard to go further into dictatorship territory than that, right? Like, and then, like, I'm not saying that Trump will in fact do that, but like he caused there to now be a ruling. This is now a precedent that, for who knows how long into the future, like any president can say, just like commit a crime and then say, look, Supreme Court, as long as I commit the crime while carrying out the duties of my office using the powers of the office, right? So you can't just like kill anyone in any way at any time, but right. But it looks like okay, he's the commander in chief, so ordering SEAL Team 6 to attack something appears to be, exercising the powers of his office, carrying out his duties, or allegedly, right, as he believes, right?
Mhm.
So like, like okay,
Yeah.
so like, yeah, we have robust institutions, but he's weakening them. And if
Mhm.
this keeps happening, there will be a time when eventually it's gone.
So at this point, I think maybe the viewer will be a bit confused because you have introduced your book, Progressive Myths, but
Hmm.
on the other hand, you seem very much against Trump. So how do you square this
Yeah,
contradiction,
yeah.
this apparent contradiction?
Yeah, so right. It's puzzling that I'm neither a radical leftist or a radical rightist. Uh, I'm how about this? I'm against insanity. No, I mean, like the reason I'm against Trump is the same as the reason why I'm against woke progressivism, which is that I want to preserve American institutions and traditions. Like I
Mhm.
think I think we have a great society. Like the institutions that we built and the traditions are like the greatest thing that human beings have accomplished, right? Like greatest thing we've accomplished isn't like putting people on the moon, although that's pretty cool. And it's not even like eradicating smallpox or whatever, like that's also really impressive. But no, the greatest thing we achieved was having a stable, prosperous, free society, with institutions that work pretty well. Okay, and like, I'm saying Trump is trying to blow that up, but I also think like the progressive left is attacking that. They're attacking our institutions. They're just like attacking America. Like, they're like putting forward, so, these myths that I'm trying to debunk in this book, they they have a theme to them. The theme is our society is evil. And what's the problem with that? It's like, well, basically, I think that you have to have some sense of loyalty to the society in order for it to be stable. If people don't have any sense of loyalty, then they will not be motivated to do this stuff. Like you have to take some cost in order to enforce our norms. And people won't be willing to do that unless they, to some degree, believe in the society. And so then, you can't have people going around saying like, oh, no, our institutions are all unjust, right? When they're not. If they were unjust, then yeah,
Okay,
right.
so if we actually were in Nazi Germany, then you would see it as obviously correct for people to deem the society evil and try to fight it in some way. But your main point is
Yeah.
that the society is not unjust at the
Yeah. Yeah.
moment, or it's not
Yeah.
grossly unjust. I guess you still think that some parts of it are unjust, but it's not
Yeah.
at the level of a dictatorship. Okay.
Yeah. 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 If you're in a terrible society, then sure, yeah, blow it up. Right. But if you're in one of the best societies in history, no, don't blow things up. Right. So I'm not saying don't change anything, right? So, but we should change things in an orderly way, I guess, and like in um a modest way, not just blow things up, not just tear things down, but if you want to change something, like have a specific alternative in place. It's not like like, oh, okay, like there's something wrong with the police. Okay, so like the stupid response is, oh, the police are killing too many people. The stupid response to this is, yeah, okay, let's just like cancel the police. Which is like no funding. So then there just won't be any cops. And then nothing else. So let's just see what happens. Like a response would be, okay, what can we do? Do we need to give them better training? Or okay, and like my view is, well, actually we should start outsourcing their job to private security. So we should hire more private security because there's competition among security guard companies and there's not competition among the police because they're a monopoly.
Mhm.
So like, I basically, because I'm a capitalist, I basically think that that's the problem. But anyway, like, you should have a reform in mind that solves the problem that the police are there to solve. Let's not throw that out, but, it improves on the problems that they have.
Mhm. Okay, so Professor Huemer, because I have you here and because I'm a bit younger than you, I wanted to ask. I have the impression that these elections are like the craziest we've ever been, but maybe it's just me, my youngness speaking. Do you have a feeling that this is like the political atmosphere is more crazier than usual, or it's somehow more
Yeah.
polarized? Yeah.
Well, definitely since 2016. So, I mean, the temperature started to go up when Obama was elected, which I think is not his fault. It's the fault of like assholes who didn't like him. Which included Trump. Like Trump started saying, "Oh, he was born in Kenya," whatever. Okay, but it wasn't so bad. But it got worse in 2016, and so, and I think this is partly that. Well, that specific person has a negative effect on our norms, right? And then, but there's sort of like the far right and the far left are feeding off each other. Like, when you point to something that one of them did that was crazy, they say, what about this other thing that the other side said? See, they're worse than us. And no, anyway. So, now is this the worst that it's ever been? No. The worst that it's ever been is probably during the Civil War. Okay. But that was a while ago. There was also a lot of unrest during the 1960s, which I didn't witness myself, but I read about. So, um, like it's probably not that bad now because there really were like riots in the streets, like
Hmm.
um police shooting people, like like they can't state shooting, like just shooting student protesters. It's just like right. So, we're not at that stage, but we have had riots, and so
Hmm.
and it's a pretty serious polarization.
Okay, so I've noticed you didn't talk about social media about
Yeah.
in your answer. Do you think that's not really much of a problem?
Well, I mean, I think social media is amplifying the polarization. Yeah. I mean, part of what's happening is the business model. So like the business model of free media has always been this way. So, like there's media that you pay for, like you write a book and then you sell it to people. And that has one set of incentives where you're serving the consumer. But then there's the free media model where the person who's consuming the media is not paying for it. And their business model is um their customers, advertisers. So their job is to try to capture as much attention as possible so that they can sell it to advertisers. And Okay, and so like that was always the case. So that was the case with television and radio, but it's just that with the internet and social media, it's like the competition has been ramped up. So like there's just like way more providers and there's just like fewer rules. And they're sort of like they're more efficient at sort of implementing that business model. And then it just turns out that the way to capture attention is not to provide the most accurate, sober, and relevant analyses
Hmm.
of society, right? It turns out that, like, yeah, the truth is usually not maximally entertaining. And so if you have somebody who is devoted to the truth, they're going to lose out in competition systematically to people who are devoted to entertainment.
Hmm.
And then it turns out that, a lot of the entertainment just like increases polarization.
Yeah, but our algorithms are based, as you just said, on entertainment. So is this sustainable going forward? Is this something because as you just said, the algorithm is based on entertainment, and because scholars that are not entertaining or charismatic, that maybe are just only truthful, don't rise to the top of the algorithm. Is this a sustainable system that is? Or
Well,
do you see capitalism like? Do you see the need for some regulations, or do you think it's just going to be the free marketplace of ideas is going to produce the truth at the end? Because it doesn't at the moment, I'm not sure. It seems like I'm a bit.
yeah, well, yeah. Well, yeah. So there's definitely no guarantee, right? There's no guarantee that the truth wins in competition. Like, there are free speech advocates who are very sanguine, but no, like I think the right argument is not to say, oh yeah, if there's just, anybody can say anything, then because people are smart, they're just going to figure out the truth. Not necessarily, right? But I think the right argument to make is, well, what's our alternative? So, like, the alternative to having people just say whatever they want is somebody tells them what they can say. Who's that going to be? Well, like, I mean, so like, so suppose that we have an office of disinformation where their job is to detect disinformation. Who's going to run that? It's going to be run by, I don't know who, but it's going to be run by people. And those people, why won't they just use that to suppress everything that they don't like, right? To suppress contrary political opinions, or to just like promote propaganda for their own side. So,
Mhm. So do you
um,
think academia has to become smarter in this regard? Like we have to kind of understand that this is the environment we're going to be fighting in, even if we have to proclaim the truth and become a more marketable, more charismatic. Because as I see academia now, I'm a STEM kind of guy. I work in academia, like you. I'm not
yeah,
as successful as you uh, until now. I mean, up until now, but
yeah,
I plan to be. But
yeah. Right now, you're becoming
yeah.
successful.
Yeah, but what I see a lot of is that we are not trained to be charismatic at all. So
Yeah.
we are trained to kind of make these arguments with a lot of caveats. We're always trying
Yes.
to look at okay, this little criticism. We're going to try to adjust it in a certain way. When we do our talks, they're quite boring. The slides are black and white. I mean, especially in STEM. I mean, I do some pretty intensive mathematical stuff, and I love it, of course. I mean, I think it's right that it's like that in the math department because I
Yeah.
don't need a charismatic theater orator bringing me his latest proof of a theorem. But
Yeah.
when I look at our impact on society, I feel like we're powerless with respect to the algorithm or with respect to the media
Yeah. Yeah.
environment that is being created.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Yeah. So, yeah. So, I like rejected the idea of a government office determining what is true information, but what's the alternative? Like, well, maybe we have to wait for people to figure out that you can't just trust stuff that you see tweeted. And because it's kind of it's a new whatever information environment. Maybe people will figure out and they'll like start distrusting this bullshit more. Um, Now, should academics become more entertaining? Like, I don't really think so. Like, well, I try to be more entertaining than other academics, but I don't want academics thinking about their effect on society. And you might think, oh no, we should all think about our effect on society because like society matters. Like we don't want to be useless. But no, like if you start thinking about what effect is my work having on society or like how I present it, um, then you're opening the door to your political biases. And that's when people can't trust you anymore. We want you to just think about your subject. Just say what you think is true about the subject, and then let us figure out what the results of that are politically. Right? Is it because like I've like I didn't think this before, but in the last few years, I've seen cases where it looks to me like the academics are like they have one eye on the data and one eye on society, and then they say things that are not completely honest. And then because like, oh, they don't trust the public, and then but then the thing is, well, people are gonna notice that. And then they're gonna say, okay, so now we can't trust
Mm.
academics because
Uh,
they have a political bias.
How do you square that with your public-facing blog, Fake News, that we haven't talked about, but it is great,
Yeah.
by the way. And I want to just say something about the blog because a lot of articles, in my opinion, are brilliant. But there was one that struck me because it's relevant to what we're talking about. It was that on the 15th of November of 2020, you posted an article explaining how Trump could use fake electors to remain in power. And this was on the 15th of November. It was before January 6th. So it was basically after the elections.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it was impressively brilliant, in my opinion, because you were laying out exactly the route that Trump could take to, in some sense, remain in power. And I was really saddened because that article didn't. I think the only like it has at the moment is mine because it goes right back. But
Oh,
yeah, yeah, because
well,
it goes back a lot. But now now your Substack is way more popular. But
yeah. My blog used to be on a different site that was just like, fakenews.com or something. And then I moved to Substack. And when I moved to Substack, like all of the likes are gone, right? So
okay,
I
okay,
imported the things, but they aren't, yeah. So it's not the case that nobody read it, but it just looks that way.
okay, okay.
Um,
But you were
but
trying to bring the truth. You as an academic in that article, were trying to bring the truth to society. I'm assuming.
yeah, I mean, and so now I don't completely remember what I said there, but like I do remember there being an article like what you described. I don't remember exactly what it was saying, but I think this was something that Trump might have been already planning, and that so I could think about, oh, what would the effects on society be if I post this? Like maybe Trump will read it. Trump is not going to read this, but maybe it serves as a warning, right? Like whatever is true, like if there's a weakness in our system, or maybe I should tell people about that before somebody malicious figures it out and exploits it without telling someone in advance what they're doing.
Yeah. So my question is, how do you square it with what you said before regarding academics should just
Yeah,
not be so
yeah,
preoccupied
not
with
think
society? Yeah.
right. Yeah, good. Um, like I should probably um sort of I don't know, make a distinction and qualify that, right? Like, um, it's good to think about like um what things what things could we figure out that would be useful to society to figure out, right? If you're a medical researcher, like a reasonable thing to think is, well, what are the big problems? Like maybe I should work on aging because that's the thing that's killing most people. So like have an on benefit to society in that sense. But I don't want people when they're figuring out the content of their article to say, I'm going to say the thing that I think will be politically beneficial. But I guess like I don't completely think that. Like I think, well, maybe if you think the thing that you're about to say will have some really bad political effect, maybe you delay it, right? Like, but I don't think you should lie about it. I remember there being this controversy because Sam Harris, like I think after the last election, Sam Harris had made this comment that, he could see why you would suppress the Hunter Biden laptop story.
Uh-huh.
Right. And then like some people started attacking him, like, oh, you're in favor of lying and propaganda, whatever, whatever. And he wasn't in favor of lying, but he was saying it was at least reasonable to think you should just hold off on reporting that story until after the election. And That sounded reasonable to me. I don't know why people freaked out about it. Right. Um,
Um,
so like, yeah, I wouldn't say lie about it, and I wouldn't say suppress the truth indefinitely, but there could be times when you should just delay what you have to say.
oh, that's really interesting. I wasn't expecting you to say something like that. So you would be in favor of delaying the truth for some time before a very important moment in history, let's say.
Yeah, possibly, right? Like I think the Hunter Biden laptop story is a good example. And and part of the reason was that, well, like we kind of need time to figure out what really happened, right? Because like it did look like it could be like a
Yeah,
fake story.
that's true. Yeah.
It's not ridiculous to think it could be Russian propaganda. And that then that this propaganda could influence the election in a bad way. And
Hmm. That's really interesting. I don't know how I feel about that because this delaying thing, mm, I think it can open up a can of worms. Um, but I don't want to go
yeah,
into I don't want to go into the hiding into the Hunter Biden stuff. Even if I think
yeah, yeah,
it's quite interesting actually to talk about. I think the reason they delayed it was no, I don't want to say something that's incorrect actually. No, I'm not going to touch it.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, actually, I don't know. My knowledge is based on Sam Harris's comments, so
yeah.
I may not know what I'm talking about.
Okay, that's a good preface for the viewers. Okay, so I can't resist because you brought in Sam Harris. I already actually know a bit what you think about Jordan Peterson, probably the most famous public
Yeah,
intellectual. But could you tell our viewers too what you think?
yeah. Oh, about Peterson or Harris?
Yeah, no, about Peterson
Oh,
in general. If you want to talk about Harris
oh,
too, that would be great. I think
yeah.
that.
I like Jordan Peterson. I find him entertaining, and I think he's a good guy. I do find him to be a bit too rambly for my taste, like as a speaker. And like he'll give an answer to a question, and then like this answer is just going on and on, and you're like, right? And like frequently he's talking in metaphors, and you're not sure what he means. That and then it looks like he's about to stop, but then something they just said reminds him of something else, and then he just goes off on another thing. He just like keeps going. So anyway, like so as a speaker, like I would like more organization, okay? But that, maybe that's just a personal taste. But okay, and oh yeah, and then, like sometimes I think there's like sometimes like he says stuff that is not well informed, maybe. Okay. So there's a case where he commented on global warming and he's like, oh, we can't trust these climate models because like people can't predict the weather 2 weeks in advance or whatever. And whatever, I'm not a climate scientist and I know you're not either. So, why are you commenting on that? All of that. Okay, so that's all a preface to say, nevertheless, he's a good influence on the culture. Like, there are all these people who are attacking Jordan Peterson. I don't know. Like, I had this thing about Elon Musk as well, that there are all these people who are attacking them, and the people who are attacking them, there's something unseemly about the fact that people who are attacking them have not done anything like as much good as the people they're attacking, right? So, like, you know, okay. Like his Peterson's book, 12 Rules for Life. Like, I don't think that I need that, but I think there are people who need that book. Like, and it says some stuff that you might think is like obvious advice or whatever, clean up your room and stand up straight and whatever. Um, but in actual fact, it's helping people. Like there are actually people who need that message, right? And like there are people who come up to him after his events and tell him that he turned their life around. And I haven't done that. Like that hasn't happened to me. And like the people who are attacking Peterson, that doesn't happen to them. They haven't like turned people's lives around. So then I feel like
What
the main reaction I should have is good job.
what do you make about the fact that they both endorsed Trump?
Oh yeah, that was wait. Who endorsed Peterson
Yeah,
endorsed Trump? Yeah, Sam Harris
but
has been one of the biggest Trump haters.
no, sorry, I was talking about Elon Musk and
Oh, Elon Musk.
Peterson.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Um, Bizarre. I don't know what the hell is going on. I don't know what's going on. Um, I mean, like, Well, like those two people, yeah. So Jordan Peterson and Elon Musk struck me as smart people, and they didn't strike me as suckers. Okay, so I know you can be smart and also be a sucker, right? Like it would be, that could be, this reminds, I don't know, I'm free associating now, but this reminds me that, the magician James Randi, he would like go around debunking claims of psychics and paranormal phenomena. And he was able to do this partly because he was a magician. And so like a lot of the things they were doing were like magic tricks. Okay, but he commented sometime that like uh it was easier to fool scientists than to fool a magician. Because like the scientists would take what they were seeing at face value, and James Randi would just always think they were trying to trick him or something. Anyway, so I think that was just making the point that you could be really smart but be a sucker, be easily taken advantage of. So I guess that's what's going on, but it's surprising to me because I didn't think that Jordan Peterson and Elon Musk were suckers.
Hmm.
Like that they were naive people. I'm like, I tried to figure out why people like Trump. And okay, as a matter of fact, I think a lot of my readers are Trump supporters. So, like, I have a big libertarian audience, and a lot of libertarians are Trump supporters. I don't quite understand, and they probably don't understand why I don't understand. Um, uh, so, but okay, but like, I've seen some of these things on YouTube where they interview Trump supporters and ask them, like, what do you like about this guy? Okay, so one thing is, they think that he loves America. They think he's a patriot. And another thing is they think he, quote, tells it like it is. Okay, so patriotic and honest, I guess. Now, that's not my perception at all. Um, my perception is that he doesn't value America at all and that he doesn't tell the truth at all. So, okay, so why do they think that he loves America? Because he says that he does. And then, uh, and I guess the Democrats don't really say that, or at least not so much. Right. And then again, why do they think that he tells it like it is? Well, he doesn't go for some of the bullshit. Actually, this is the thing. Like in a way, he's more honest than other politicians, and in a way, he's less honest. He's more honest in that he's not dissembling. So he's not concealing his feelings. He's like, yeah, he's saying what he feels like saying, and he's expressing how he really feels about things, like, those shithole countries, whatever. Okay. But
Mhm.
he's less honest in the sense of less true to like objective facts about the external world, right? Like he doesn't care what the objective facts are. So, okay, so like I feel like I have some sense of why people would think that he was honest. So like you have a sort of honesty detector with normal politicians. You hear them talking and it always sounds fake. Like
Mhm.
they're not really being themselves. And so then you
Mhm.
think, I can't trust those people. And then like you hear Trump talking and he sounds like he's not fake. He sounds like your crazy uncle at, at Thanksgiving dinner who's just going to rant about whatever he wants.
Hmm. Okay. Um, and what about the fact? Hmm. Because it's interesting. You find yourself really at this crossroads politically. Do you feel homeless a bit, in a way?
Uh, I guess I'm homeless, but I don't care because I'm not very social, so I don't really need a tribe. But if I did, I guess I'd be upset. Um,
Okay.
I mean, yeah, so like, I'm a libertarian. I'm like a stereotypical libertarian. But, it's turned out that, well, like a bunch of libertarians have broken in favor of Trump. And so I was a little disappointed by that. But then I think there are like some woke libertarians now, and I'm disappointed by that. Like, I feel like,
Really?
my tribe should not be splitting and joining the other teams. Like, we should just, we should just stick to being the, contrarians who don't support either of the major parties.
Okay. Well, now we're gonna get a bit more into the philosophical. That's actually the main reason I brought you here. This was actually more for the algorithm. Well, but very
Oh,
entertaining
yeah.
though. Very entertaining to hear your views. But before this, we have a little technical issue. So, to the philosophy. What are your views on continental philosophy?
Yeah, good. So, I mean, first I should say, like, I'm not a continental philosophy expert. So if you want to know about it, don't listen to me. Okay, but just like I don't know if you're interested in like whatever humorous philosophy, yeah, I don't like it. No, I don't like continental philosophy. Analytic philosophy is obviously better. Okay,
Okay.
and why do I not like it? So basically, like I think there are three things. Like when you're teaching students how they should write a philosophy paper or something, like there are three key things. First of all, they need to be clear. So they need to have a thesis, and it needs to be clear and explicit what the thesis is. And if I can't figure out what it is, bad paper. Okay. And then secondly, there need to be arguments for that thesis. And then you would tell them some things about what makes a good argument. But like you gotta have an argument for your thesis. And it should have premises. And when I read your paper, I should not be wondering what your premises are. It should be obvious to me what the premises are, and it should be obvious that this conclusion follows, right? Or at least obvious why you think it follows. Okay. And then last thing is you should consider objections. And like when you do that, you should think like, what would a smart person who doesn't agree with my thesis possibly say? And then you say the objections and you like try to present them as well as possible. And then you explain why you're not ultimately persuaded by them. Okay. That's a good philosophy paper. And then I feel like the continental philosophers just don't do any of those things. They don't have a clear thesis. Like they're saying something, but you're not sure what. Right. And like often there's just like very vague abstract jargon. Like the whole, you open any of these continental philosophy books, just like abstract jargon, just a wall, a wall of it, right? And very vague, right? And then like they'll give all these metaphors, right? And it's not like, they tell you what they mean first, and then here's a metaphor that helps you understand it more. No, it's just the metaphor. They never tell you what the literal meaning is, right? Okay. And then you're like, okay, so I don't know, I've got like some super vague idea of what you're saying. And then like, okay, what's the argument? And then like you can't figure out what their argument is. And you're like, and it's not that they didn't have any argument, it's just that like it's just fuzzy, right? You're sort of being led along a line of thought, but it's hard to distinguish what the premises are. The premises are vague and they okay, and ambiguous. And then they virtually never consider objections.
Hmm.
Like I don't think that, but I'm not a
Okay.
content. I haven't read a bunch of this, but I haven't seen any case where the continental philosopher says, and here's what somebody would object. Objection one, objection two, whatever.
Okay. But mm, okay, I think first things first. But would you have a so let me try to challenge you a bit because my channel has been pretty critical of continental philosophy. So, but do you have any definition of continental philosophy? Because a lot of people say that actually this distinction between analytic and continental philosophy is not a good one. It's basically, some say it's fabricated in the sense that there isn't really a clear definition between the two things. And analytic philosophers like to make it seem like there's this distinction, but in reality,
Yeah.
there's
Well,
not.
um, but why would they be saying there's no distinction? I mean, so
Because they say
you mean like,
there's some analytic philosophers that, for example, talk about Hegel. They
okay,
they try to write about stuff that continental philosophers usually have written about, and then they say that
okay,
the stylistic difference is
yeah,
actually not is too fuzzy to compare the two things. I think this is one of the
okay,
major.
good, yeah. Oh, I see. Okay, so like one thought is, oh, well, maybe there's some overlap, or maybe the distinction is not completely sharp and precise, and maybe it's hard to articulate what it is. And there are some borderline cases. Okay, so like I think maybe Wittgenstein is a borderline analytic and continental philosopher.
Mhm.
Um, but no, the thing is like, uh, it's kind of true of most distinctions. That's true about most concepts, like all those things. Like almost every concept that we have is vague. There's almost always borderline cases. It's almost always hard to define it. So if you're going to throw out this distinction, you should throw out the distinction between cats and dogs also, like, red and blue. Um, but so, okay, but so, like, is it? is there a distinction at all? Well, like, um, there's a bunch of people who are considered continental philosophers where there are borderline cases, but then there are non-borderline cases. There are people who are clearly considered continental philosophers and people who are clearly analytic philosophers. And then if you read a bunch of the continental philosophers, are you going to get any sense that they have something in common? Well, I think you will. That's why we made this. Like, you start reading them and like it just it feels like these people go together. Like these people are similar to each other. And then these other people, okay. And that's how concepts are. It's like that's why we accepted cats, because we saw a bunch of these things, and then these things seem similar to each other,
Mm.
right? And then we draw a line around them.
Okay. What would you say to people who tell you that uh, the way you have basically you've defined the continental philosophy as being unclear, as not having premises and not having arguments. So you've like already defined them to be bad in a sense. Like they can't defend themselves from your definition. Like it's your I don't know. Like your definition is kind
Yeah.
of
Well,
tautologically bad.
uh, and not necessarily like, it's not analytic that arguments are good, right? There might be people who don't like arguments and they don't like clarity or don't consider them good. I don't know, but I mean that wasn't a definition
Okay.
anyway, right? That was just observations. So, like suppose there's somebody who actually does not know. They actually don't know what we're talking about, right? Because like, say there's a beginning philosophy student, they just have no idea what this distinction is. What would I tell them? I go, okay, well, the best way of explaining any concept is really giving a bunch of examples, right? So it's say, okay, like Jean-Paul Sartre, Martin Heidegger, Hegel, like so, here's a bunch of people. Look at a bunch of their writings, okay. And then on the other side, the analytic philosophers like G. Moore, Bertrand Russell, okay, or Timothy Williamson, okay. Read those guys. And then they're going to see that there's something similar there, right? And then they're probably going to notice the similarities include like something to do with being clear versus vague and like having sharp arguments and addressing objections. Like you'll probably just notice that in the writings that are considered analytic.
Mm. And what do you make about the people who say that actually it's only a perceived obscurity in language that you're seeing? That because you're not aware of the technical terms in that body of literature. For example, if I were to talk about my body of work with another academic who doesn't know exactly what I'm doing, he probably would see a bunch of nonsense at first because you have to, know some stochastic calculus. You maybe have to know what Ito's
Yeah.
lemma is, and all of these things that, at a first glance, can seem, yeah,
Yeah.
not very coherent.
Nonsensical.
Yeah, they can seem incoherent, but um,
Right.
so
Well,
some people object in the sense that because you're not an expert, it seems unclear to you, but actually these terminologies are made to make things clearer, not unclearer.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that would be true in science, like scientific jargon. Well, not always, I guess. Theoretically, scientific jargon is introduced to make things clearer. I think frequently when people are writing, they just like complicate the language just to make it sound smarter or something. But anyway, okay. But yeah, I get okay. So like when I look at a science article or just a book, I see unfamiliar terminology, but I do like this doesn't sound compelling, okay? But I get a different feeling when I read a science article that I don't understand, when I read a continental philosophy article. Okay, but here's a more objective thing to say. Like
Okay.
I can find a textbook where those terms are defined, and I can find another textbook where they're defined in the same way, right? Like, so then I think, yeah, this is a legitimate technical term. They actually know what they mean by it. And then when I read the continental philosophy, it's like the different continental philosophers, they're just using different terms that they made up. And then like you can't find any textbook where they're defined. And you try to find the philosopher himself defining it, and then they give some explanation, but the explanation itself is like super vague, right? And so, the better explanation is, yeah, well, they're just they just don't have a very clear meaning. It's not like completely meaningless, like a positivist would say. There's some meaning, but it's just a very vague and kind of ambiguous meaning.
Okay. So can I ask you something because I'm of a different department, but how would you say your view of continental philosophy is something that a lot of other academics share? Or would you say that you're like kind of out on an island regarding your
Well,
views?
yeah, there's kind of a schism between analytic and continental philosophers. So I would say many other analytic philosophers share my view of continental philosophy. Like I think it's probably quite common to think, yeah, continental philosophy is bad, right?
Okay. And
And you could have varying degrees of strength of that that feeling, but then I think there's a bunch of continental philosophers who think that it's good, right? But the top ranked philosophy departments in the country are mainly analytic. Like I think the only good philosophy department that's kind of continental is Pittsburgh. And then other than that, like, the top 50, I think they all or all. Then I think below is sort of like the whatever lower ranked or unranked departments. I think there's a lot of continental philosophy that's just sort of that my people don't don't talk about or don't pay attention to.
and is there no continental author you've particularly enjoyed in your studies? None that
Oh yeah,
captured your attention?
yeah, that's a good question. I mean, who's my favorite continental philosopher? The answer is Jean-Paul Sartre. I,
Really?
I find him interesting and entertaining. And as a matter of fact, like in a recent class, so in every semester, I have the students pick the topics for the last unit of the class. 5 units. Unit 5 is student selected topics. Okay, so the students wanted to talk about existentialism, so I taught Sartre because he's fun and
Okay.
interesting, and I like
Okay.
his radical free will thesis.
Okay. So this brings me to one of my possible objections to your argument against continental philosophy, or maybe an objection somebody could make, is that usually, as far as I can see, continental philosophers manage to make things more fun, more entertaining. So maybe one could say they're engaging in a kind of edutainment. They're trying to the reason why they're vaguer, they're unclearer, is because they're trying to make the writing more interesting. They're trying to engage the students or who has to read more. And so they're unclearer because they're doing a bit of not pop science exactly, but they're making it more
Yeah,
passionate or something like that. What do you think about that?
yeah. I mean, I don't generally find that to be the case. I generally find that to be the opposite of the case. Right, but it may be that people have different tastes, okay, but when I look at the continental philosophy, I find it much less engaging. I find it like a slog to get through a single page. Like, um, but like maybe I'm just different from, you know, other people. Maybe other people find it entertaining, but like I find like being confronted with a wall of vague abstract jargon where I feel like I don't know what any of the words mean is not fun. That's the opposite. And when I think about somebody who's fun to read, I think like John Searle, okay, or even more David Stove, though he's not as well known. Um, and he's very clear and he's just hilarious.
Okay.
Right?
Oh, by the way, who is your favorite philosopher?
Uh, Me, like humor, um, and then I think I think David Stove is the best philosophical writer. I wouldn't say he's the best philosopher, but like maybe even in the history of the subject, he's the best philosophical writer. I just think he's hilarious and and kind of like, kind of making good points at the same time while making fun of other philosophers. I like that.
And who do you
Who's
think
the
is the most accurate philosopher?
most accurate?
Yeah,
Other, oh, me?
other than yourself.
Other than me, I don't know. I mean, I was going to say like, Aristotle was the greatest philosopher in history. Okay. And I think that's also widely accepted. He's wrong about almost everything. But the thing is, that's not really his fault because he lived 2,000 years ago. And like he did about as well as you could do, okay? And he came up with theories that became like the dominant theories for 2000 years. So that's pretty great. Anyway, yeah, who's the most accurate other than me? I don't know. Like I like Thomas Reid. Um, he has similar views to me, I guess.
Okay,
Uh,
back. No, sorry,
what?
sorry, sorry. You want to say something else about that? I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah. Well, Thomas Reid was sort of like the anti-David Hume, right? It's like right, his philosophy is sort of like a response to David Hume and Berkeley. But I mean, it wasn't that he had all these amazing insights. It was just that he saw the craziness of some other philosophers and he saw where things went wrong and he rejected the the wrong starting point, right? The wrong starting point was what he called the theory of ideas. The theory of ideas in Hume and Locke and Berkeley is the theory that when you're aware of something, what you're aware of is always something in your own mind. So ideas are the objects of awareness. And then when you start from there, you just get like the rest of what happens in Berkeley. So like actually Locke started that. Locke started by saying, by idea, I mean the object of awareness when a person is thinking, it's something like that. And then Berkeley just takes it off from there. It's just going to result that there isn't anything but ideas. Like you're because you're gonna wind up being forced ultimately to say that tables are ideas, right? Either that or you can't be aware of tables, right? Like, but obviously I'm aware of tables, so tables have to be ideas. And that it was sort of like a short version. There's like just like a more long drawn out version of that in Berkeley, right? And then, Thomas Reid just said, well, like apparently Thomas Reid was originally persuaded by Bishop Berkeley, which I don't know how like philosophy oriented your readers are, like if they know Berkeley's philosophy and everything, but Berkeley thought that the only things that exist are minds and ideas in the mind. So like the computer in front of me is just a collection of ideas in my mind. Okay. And also in God's mind. Okay. Because there's a big mind not up in the sky because the sky is just an idea, but there's a big mind that perceives everything else. Okay. So apparently Thomas Reid was originally convinced by Bishop Berkeley's system, but then he noticed a further problem, which was that if the computer in front of me is just an idea in my mind, then you're just an idea in my mind too. So I have no reason to think that there are any other human minds, right? Like Berkeley has an argument for believing in God, but like there wouldn't be an argument for believing in other people's minds. Because like I just see your body, which is an idea in my own mind. And so then Reid thought that that was too far. We can't go there. And then, and then he realized that, well, the problem was thinking that the objects of awareness are ideas. Ideas aren't the things that you're aware of. They're your means of being aware of the objects, the real things. So then he thought, well, we should just say that when we perceive normally, we're just aware of physical objects. Right? And they're and like there's supposed to be like all these great arguments against that, but they're really not that great when you think about them more.
Okay.
I'll just leave it there.
Okay. Okay. So back to objections to your views on continental philosophy. What do you make about the people who say, um, wait a minute, I have it written down here. Oh yeah, that language is always going to be vague and not clear. So the meaning of the sentences you say of the philosophical tracks you write, it's always going to be subject to a certain degree of interpretability. So we shouldn't expect our writings to be to have a stable meaning, but the meaning is always going to be in flux. However, you're going to write your paper or your work.
Yeah. Well, is language always vague? No, not always, but usually, almost always. Okay. And so not demanding that everything be 100% precise. And the reason why I said not always is I think mathematics is precise and not vague. I think maybe mathematics is completely precise. Okay, but like you can't really do philosophy by just doing math. Um, so like you can't talk about the things that you care about using only precise language. Fair enough, but you can use more precise language. There are degrees of vagueness, right? It doesn't have to be that vague. It doesn't have to be as vague as it is in the Continental philosophy. And my evidence for this is, the tradition of analytic philosophy. Like what's wrong with that? And when you read that, like we're talking about, a lot of similar things. Like, I guess not the, yeah, not exactly the same things, but a lot of big philosophical topics.
Okay, so what do you make about the people who say that a lot of Continentals, for example, say that because analytic philosophy is in love with logic, it's in love with some, yeah, logic essentially, and because for a logical argument you can't, um, for a deductive argument you can't obtain more than you put in the premises. You're not going to say things that are interesting. You're not going to say things that are metaphysically interesting because logic is not the right tool to apply to certain philosophical domains. This is something that continental
Yeah.
philosophers sometimes say. Have you heard about this?
Uh, Probably. I've probably heard things like that. Yeah, that's not true. Well, so okay, so yeah, like here's a theory, that you might think, oh, well, when you give a deductive argument, like all of the information that's in the conclusion was already contained in the premises.
Hmm.
What do you mean by contained? Like, it's not true that the conclusion was literally one of the premises, right? It wasn't like a part of one of the premises. That's not true. Like, what do you mean by contained? Well, it turns out that what you mean by contained is entailed by. Okay. Well, okay. And now, so like you've got a theory about how deduction is never useful, but like, how about we just actually look and see? Are there ever any times that you learn something by considering a deductive argument? Like, of course there are. Of course that has happened.
Well,
Like,
in mathematics, it's full
yeah.
of examples. Okay.
Yeah, like the famous proof that there are infinitely many prime numbers, which I mentioned because I just like it. That's like a great argument, right? Like it's like okay, I'm just gonna go ahead and say it because even though it's not a math podcast, right? But like okay, say that there were only finitely many prime numbers, okay, and so just take all of the prime numbers, multiply them together, and then add one to the product. Then you have a new number which is not divisible by any of the previous prime numbers because if you divide it by any of the previous numbers, it would have a remainder of one. So now you've introduced a new prime number that's larger than any of the previous prime numbers. So that shows it can't be that there were only finitely many. Okay. So anyway, imagine somebody saying, okay, well, that's a deductive argument. So that means that the conclusion was contained in the premises. So we didn't learn anything from that. But that's not true. Like before hearing that argument, I didn't know that there were infinitely many prime numbers. And now, okay, does that ever happen in philosophy? Well, like I could give examples of arguments in philosophy that look, pretty persuasive, where like they could persuade you of a conclusion that you didn't initially believe. Okay. So here's a famous argument from the ethics literature. There's like Thompson's violinist argument. It's like, okay, we're trying to figure out whether abortion is morally wrong. Okay. And then there's a dispute about whether fetuses are people. And Thompson says, well, you know what? Even if fetuses are people, abortion is still permissible. Okay. And like the argument for this is, well, so imagine that there was a world famous violinist who he needs to be physically attached to your body so that your kidneys can filter toxins out of his blood. And if he doesn't get this, he's going to die. Now, fortunately, he only has to be attached to you for 9 months. Okay, but you'll be like, you'll have this guy attached to you for the whole 9 months. And then, you didn't want to be attached, but in the middle of the night, a society of music lovers kidnapped you and attached you to the violinist. And then you wake up and you're like, what the hell is this? And then there are these doctors who say, well, we're very sorry this happened to you, but unfortunately, we can't detach you because it'll kill the violinist. All right. So, question, is it permissible to detach yourself? And then like almost everyone's intuitive reaction is yes, it is. Okay. And so then that's supposed to show analogously that it is, even if fetuses are people, it is still permissible to detach yourself from the fetus, right, to remove it from your body, even though it will die. All right. So, and that's not just, it's not like I'm just shuffling around words, right? Like that is something that could persuade someone who wasn't initially persuaded.
Hmm. Wouldn't the continental philosophers say that you've smuggled in some because you haven't used a rigorous language like mathematics, but at some point you have smuggled in some implicit assumptions to make who hears the argument agree with you, but if we had a formal language, then it would come out obvious in a way. Like when you say the math example is way more clear to me because in that case, it doesn't seem to me
Yeah.
you can smuggle in stuff. But some continental types.
Yeah, well, like the philosophy, so that argument is less conclusive. So there's dispute about whether it's correct or not, which is typical for philosophical arguments, okay? But where did something go wrong? So like you could represent this as a deductive argument. Like premise one, it's permissible to detach yourself from the violinist. Premise two, the violinist situation is relevantly analogous to the fetus, abortion situation. Okay, and then you could dispute either of those. Like if you agree with both of those, then you should agree that you can detach from the fetus. Okay, but people could dispute either of those. On the first premise, it's okay to detach yourself from the violinist is like it's an ethical intuition. I don't feel like there's any smuggling going on. It's just like explicitly I'm saying, do you have this intuition? The second thing about the analogy is like, well, you could try to think of disanalogies, and then we'd have to talk about whether they were relevant disanalogies. Okay. So like I think maybe one of the more prominent things is, or maybe one of the better candidates is, oh, maybe it's disanalogous because like in the case of the fetus, you're actually the parent of that person, if it is a person, and you're not the parent of the violinist. And if you were the parent, you might have an obligation actually to to make a big sacrifice to save them. Okay. But anyway, yeah, like so we're not being sneaky. We're not smuggling stuff in there, but it's also not that like it's just useless to consider the argument, right? It's not like only people who already agree with abortion would find this persuasive. That's not true, right? Like, actually, this is like a pretty good argument for like libertarians. Right? Like, it's a pretty libertarian. So if you're a libertarian, even if you think fetuses are people, you'll probably be persuaded by this argument, right? Because self-ownership, you own your body. You don't no, there's no positive rights, you have negative rights. So even if the other person needs your body to survive, they don't have a right to use it.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. So next objection. What do you say to people that say that continental philosophy is meant to inspire other philosophers to, make to produce a work that brings us closer to truth or is useful or other stuff? So the primary goal maybe is not one to be completely clear, so then one can inspire another host or other philosophers in
Yeah.
producing another body
Well,
of work.
well, I mean, how's that working out? When have they inspired somebody to produce truth or whatever? Okay, well, maybe the continental philosophers make people produce other continental philosophy. Well, like, okay, they do cause there to be a bunch of commentators, but how useful is that? All right, so like, okay, so Heidegger writes some incomprehensible books, and then there's a bunch of people like writing about Heidegger, and then trying to figure out what it means. Like, what's great about that?
But
Like, and
so you
yeah,
would say that analytic philosophy is more useful than continental philosophy?
well, it looks like it. Like, I mean, what's more inspiring? Like, being confronted with an impenetrable wall of vague abstract jargon, or like hearing an argument that's kind of persuasive, or like hearing a clear thesis and then an argument for it that seems kind of persuasive. And then, like if you can understand what's going on, like, maybe it depends upon your intellectual personality or something, but I would think like, maybe analytic philosophers are doing more to inspire truth seeking.
Okay. Okay, this was pretty interesting. Um, so just some clarifying questions. When it comes to postmodern philosophy in particular, I'm guessing you would put that squarely in the camp of continental philosophy. So all the things you said about continental philosophy apply to postmodern philosophy. Yes?
It sounds right. Yeah.
Um, do you know anything about the Sokal hoax? About
Yeah. Yeah. I'm old enough to remember when that happened. Yeah.
oh, really? You-
I'm old enough to have assigned Alan Sokal's paper in a class. So I just like had the students read the paper and ask them, hey, what do you think about this paper? And
What did the
then
students say? What did the
they're
students
like,
say?
yeah, I don't remember, but like, I don't know, it's interesting or something. Right? And I told them about how this was a hoax. And then they're like, well, it's kind of unfair to ask us about that. We didn't know it was a hoax. And yeah, I'm like, that's kind of the point, actually. Like, and like it shows that, well, you can like trick people with a bunch of bullshit, right? But and like, yeah, when you, I don't know if your listeners know about the so-called hoax. So somebody recently tried to sort of repeat it, right? Where they, I think this is Peter Boghossian and a few other people whose names I've forgotten.
James Lindsay, Peter Boghossian, and unfortunately, I've forgotten the name of woman involved. I'm really sorry about it, but there's three
Yeah,
people, and yeah, James Lindsay and
yeah,
Peter
okay.
Boghossian. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so anyway, so the
Sorry.
so-called hoax was he tried to well, he submitted a paper, um, I guess about quantum gravity or something, and like relating quantum gravity to continental philosophy. He submitted it to this journal called Social Text, which I guess was a good continental philosophy journal or something. And they published it. And then after they published it, he came out and said, this article is complete nonsense. This just shows what like bullshit these people can be taken in by, like how low intellectual standards they have. There's some stuff, there's like some text where he's like relating the axiom of choice and the axiom of equality to the abortion issue. Right? Like, let's replace the axiom of choice with the axiom of equality or something like that. Um, and okay, total bullshit. Um, but so
Hmm.
okay, and then the more recent thing was these people like submitted a bunch of kind of BS articles to different journals, and they got some of them accepted. There's one where they're talking about I think they were talking about patriarchy or something in dog parks.
Yeah,
It was something.
they were talking about the rape, I don't know, hegemonic rape culture in dog parks.
Yeah.
Actually, I read the entirety of that article, and
Uh,
how to put it? I'm more on the fence. Like, you're very decisive in your views regarding this stuff, and I'm a bit more. mm, I don't know. I kind of see it from the outside because I know that it's possible, even in mathematics and physics, in my fields, to get published, even if you've done something that I'm
yeah.
not. I don't want to say it's bullshit, but it's quasi bullshit, or it's maybe you're just adding an epsilon on somebody else's work. And
Yeah.
of course, there's p hacking. There's a ton of stuff you can do, and
Mm.
I'm a bit worried of just subjecting
Yeah.
some fields to these standards of rigor in a
Yeah. Yeah.
way.
Well, yeah. So, there's a question like, are these fields full of BS? And there's a question, was it proved by this illustration?
Mm.
No, because because if you are into this kind of stuff, what you should have said was, those are good articles. It doesn't matter if the author believes it or not. Right? Like, I could put, so what if somebody who doesn't agree with continental philosophy can publish an article in one of their journals and then they can disavow it? Of course you could do that, right? Like, I could publish an analytic philosophy article and then I could disavow it. So what? Or, I could publish an article defending empiricism. I could probably make a reasonable case for it, right? And then after I could say, haha, empiricism is bullshit. I can't believe they published that.
So the point you're trying to make is that continental philosophers, or I mean, the editors of social text should have should stand by the article, even if somebody says it's bullshit. They should just say, no, that's a good article anyway. Um,
Yeah.
I guess based on which criterion, this is sometimes because I come from STEM, I think our criterions are much. It's a bit easier for us to understand what the goal is and what we're doing. And
Yeah.
when
Well,
it, mm, okay.
well, I don't know. I mean, like, however they selected it, right? Like, past peer review, like,
But well,
you think there were good arguments?
there wasn't peer review in social text. There was just an editor
Oh,
review.
oh, okay. All right. Well, but I mean, what they actually said, as far as I recall, is we didn't think the article was that good to begin with, but
Yeah.
we thought it was nice that a person from another field is reaching out, and we wanted to be nice to him or something like that. And to me, that just totally discredits them. Like if they had said, it doesn't matter if he agrees with his own article. We read the article. We think it's a good article. It doesn't matter if he thinks it's good. If they had said that, I would have been impressed. Um, but like whatever their reason was for accepting it, it's not changed by the author saying that he himself doesn't think it's good. Like, what if you're in science and like, okay, like a string theorist publishes an article about how string theory is wrong. So what? Like, right? Like, and they just like try to imagine what the opposite view would say, and then they just fill their article with what they think the other guy's arguments would be, and it gets published because they did a good job of doing that. And then, that doesn't prove anything.
So something I was wondering while you were talking is you said the Continental philosopher you like the more was Jean-Paul Sartre. But I mean, based on what criterion? If you put them in this basket of deplorables, to use a Hillary Clinton term, uh, how do you judge between the others? Why did you choose to teach Sartre to your students?
Oh, I mean, well, because I don't know, I had a previous professor in college who taught Sartre, and I found it interesting. So I used that article that I already knew. I mean, look, like really like part of it was I already knew that article because somebody taught it to me before. And
Yeah.
I don't want to go and read a whole bunch of new things, so I'm gonna do that. But but also that when they taught it, it went pretty well.
Okay.
Um, you know,
Hmm. And
and that, but why? Yeah, partly because like, well, okay, so I used the article "Existentialism is a Humanism," which is like, well, it's kind of an introduction to existentialism, and I think it's Sartre's maybe idiosyncratic take on what existentialism is, but like that's okay, that's good enough. And then I felt like I understood it, like I felt like I could identify arguments in it, right? So like maybe this was not a paradigm example of continental philosophy because like I could understand what he was saying and I could find arguments in it and I could find objections actually. Um,
hmm. So mm, okay, so to leave open, so you're saying that in some continental types, there are some articles in which they do provide clear arguments in which you can see some objections and stuff like that. So
yeah.
uh,
Yeah. So that, so this whole distinction is kind of fuzzy. Yeah.
yeah.
But, it's like, um, there's this idea in philosophy of language of the cluster of descriptions, the, right, or the family resemblances. Right, this comes from Wittgenstein. That the idea that, well, okay, so the example from Wittgenstein is you're trying to define the word game. And you're like, okay, what is the essence of games that all games have in common? And he says there isn't any particular characteristic that they all have in common. And then he's like, well, okay, so it's like there are family resemblances. There are these activities that people call games, and like there's like a cluster of characteristics that tend to go together. Like this thing resembles this other thing in certain respects, but it doesn't exactly resemble it. And okay, it's kind of like that. So what are the characteristics for continental philosophy? Like, yeah, like some kind of vague abstractions are being used a lot, but also like it counts that you're from the continent. The reason it's called continental is that it's like it's mostly France and Germany, the continent being Europe as opposed to England, right? And then the United States, right?
Hmm.
But and like there's the English speaking philosophers, and then there's just sort of like um whom you talk to, right? Whom you're in dialogue with, right? So if in your work you're in dialogue with the other people who are considered analytic philosophers, that counts towards your being an analytic philosopher. Like like you read their articles and you talk about them and then respond to them, etc.
Mhm. Okay, so um, some personal stuff that I was wondering about, and in so turning back to your book, Progressive Myths, in which you talk about some
Available on Amazon.
available on Amazon. People should go buy it. We're going to put the link in the description. Um, hmm. So, how to put it? Hmm. Do you think that in some cases, do you see a connection between postmodern philosophy and the fact that people have these what you call progressive myths, or there's no, or things are not connected in your mind?
I don't know. I mean, so like there's a temptation to look at what philosophers are saying and then assume that people took it to heart. And then so, I could say, oh, maybe these postmodernists have been promoting irrationality. Like they've been sort of like undermining reason. And then maybe a bunch of these leftists took that to heart and they said, oh, okay, so now we don't have to be rational. So now we can just start saying the things that are convenient for us, right? Um, I'm not, uh, I'm not an expert on postmodernism, right? So like my knowledge of postmodernism is mostly it's secondhand. It's from other people talking about it, right? Which means whatever, maybe it's unfair, like Jordan Peterson's take on what postmodernism is. Maybe that's not what the pomos themselves would say it is, right? But it's like sometimes it looks like the contemporary leftist playbook is, um, we don't care about the truth. We're just trying to get power.
Hmm.
And when we say something, we're saying it because that helps our side get power.
So, if I can say a bit about my experience in academia. So, I came into academia that I had lost my faith in God. So, I was ripe to introduce new ideas, in new moral ideas inside of what I was
Yeah.
supposed to do in life. And in academia, there's the ethos, the academic ethos, a lot of academic ethos is against power and against oppressors. And of course, there's very good reasons for that, in the sense that it's quite intuitive that we don't like oppressors, and usually oppressors tend to have power. Um, Unfortunately, the way I interpreted this, because I was also not sold, but I went to these courses that were talking about epistemic relativism in some ways, in the sense that I was very interested in academia as a whole, and I would go to some talks or philosophers, and sometimes I would get the odd postmodern type talking, and I was very captivated by the some epistemic relativists' ideas or moral relativist ideas because I was very naive and I was stupid, honestly, and I didn't know how you could analyze arguments and use reason in a way that I think helps you and helps you reach the truth. But I got very captured by this ethos when I first came to academia. And I think the two tenets of the ethos, and you can tell me what you think about this, are that so the powerful one ethos is that you have to take a look at who has power, and power, usually who has power is nearly always an oppressor. And so
Mhm.
power is extremely important. Who has power is an oppressor. And this basically gives you out, if you put it in a kind of syllogistic form, that power is bad. But power if it's not
Yeah.
bad, at least it's something that you should heavily, heavily distrust.
Yeah.
And I think that if you just hold this very little moral theory, this surrogate moral theory I just told you, you can understand a lot about how people in academia, mm, their politics, how it is oriented, because it always tries
Yeah.
to stay on the side of the downtrodden, or the side of the oppressed, which is in one case, I think it's a wonderful thing. I mean, of course that's good, but there's a point where if you don't see any faults, even in who can be marginalized and who can be oppressed, sometimes they can do some bad. They can be immoral sometimes, or and power is
Yeah.
not always a bad thing. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. This is my
Yeah.
impression when I came into academia, and I was very, very postmodern, and one could say woke for a
Yeah.
while, even 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, yeah,
And then gradually I started to question a bit these presumptions, and I remained, and some of these presumptions remained in me. It's not like I thought that everything that academia was standing for was bad, because that would make the opposite mistake. If you kind of like define yourself in opposition to something that you think has mistakes, it's not you're not defining yourself as being true. You're just defining yourself in opposition to
yeah,
mistakes. Um, but
yeah,
yeah, sorry,
good.
I rambled a bit here. But what's your
Well,
thoughts on what I said?
yeah, no, that all sounds like a good description of like, like a big part of the obsession of the left is attacking the strong. Right? Like the people who are powerful are bad. And like the world is divided into oppressors and victims, and the victims are good and the oppressors are bad. And like and that so you can see why someone would think this. Like there's been a good deal of oppression in human
Yeah.
history and like a good deal of badness, right? But it's also like very oversimplified. Okay, so like one thing that I thought about, so I said this in one of my posts, who were the greatest conquerors in human history? The answer is the British. And on the face of it, that's a bit odd because when you meet British people, they do not look that fearsome. Like they don't come up and like they're not like these big burly people who like are ready to start a fight with you or anything. Like they're usually polite and whatever, And in America, when you meet a British person, you just automatically think they're more educated. Anyway, which may not be true, but you think that. So anyway, like, oh, how was that? So, and in some sense, they were oppressors because they built the biggest empire in the history of the world.
Hmm.
Uh, but they're usually nice people. So what's going on? And what's going on is like, well, what makes a society powerful is different from what makes an individual powerful within a society. So like, if you have a society, so like if if in your society it's okay to just like beat other people up, then like okay, and then you go around beating other people up and then you rise to the top, then that's good for you. But that's bad for your society. Okay. And so like, well, so it might be that um the dominant society, the dominant culture might be one where they have actually better norms. Right. Like because their society is more successful because they have more cooperative norms and thus they cooperate with each other instead of attacking each other. And like, if you have a society in which it's like it's more okay for people to just like beat each other up in order to whatever, like as a society that values dominance more, then there's going to be more dominance seeking within that society, which means that society as a whole is going to be weaker.
What would
It's
you?
like this is an explanation of why the weak are not necessarily better. They might be worse.
But what do you say to the people who would say that it was just a more subtle kind of dominance and oppression in the sense that you present
Mm.
yourself as this weak, not weak, but
Mm.
kind and
Polite,
gentle,
cooperative.
polite, yeah,
Yeah.
Englishman, but in actuality, it's actually a
Yeah.
more subtle form of coercion in which they
Well,
colonized. And I mean, there was, as you rightly said, there was a great deal of oppression too in the British
yeah, yeah,
Empire.
like yeah, so like that's true, right? Like yeah, like they built this huge empire. So like they were oppressors. True. Right? But like um does that mean that they're bad? Well, like yes, they're bad. They were bad in the way that humans are bad. Like what you have to get is like it's not, like the oppression and exploitation going on in human history. It's not a British problem, it's not a white person problem, it's not a Western problem, it's a human problem. The societies that are not oppressing other people, it's usually not because they're too good to do it. It's because they're too weak to do it. And as soon as they get the power to do it, they would. And
No,
so it's like, yeah, okay, yeah, the British did more oppressing, but it wasn't because it wasn't that they had worse motives. It's just that they had more ability to do it because their society had been more successful because their society was more cooperative. So yeah, like not pro-colonialism, right? But like, you know, they like the British Empire was probably well. it was nicer than it would have been if, like, some of these other more aggressive cultures had been in that position of power.
So what would be an example of a good kind of power?
Oh, well, I mean, in our society, there could be people who have more influence than others, and like there are different ways of getting more influence. And so one way of getting more influence than other people is um, just by being really good at cooperating, being really good at producing things that other people want, and then that makes them want to cooperate with you. Okay, so like I think of like, okay, Jeff Bezos has power because he's super rich. And the reason he's super rich is that he built Amazon. And by the way, like I know there are a bunch of people who hate Jeff Bezos and they hate Amazon, but that basically happens whenever you're successful. Okay, but I bet the people who don't like Jeff Bezos still use Amazon. Like, okay, and I use it all the time. And it's like, and it's like it produces a little bit of benefit. Okay, it's a little better to get stuff from Amazon, but it's a little better constantly for a huge number of people. Right. So the total amount of good that he's done is it's enormous. And like, okay, so like he has power. It's good that he has power because he's a person who gets good stuff done. Right. Like the bad kind of power is where you get it by just like beating the shit out of people. Like if you get power by harming other people, that's bad. If you get power by helping other people, that's good. And it
Uh,
is possible to do both of those.
An example I find helpful when I talk with my friends. Some of my friends in academia are very, I mean, I love them. I don't mean to offend them in any way, but they have different views than me. And a way that I found that's interesting is when you talk about, for example, the relationship between an adult parent and a child. So there's a big power imbalance there, but it's a good thing that there's that power imbalance in that dynamic, that the parent
Yeah.
has basically all the power with respect to the child. And once you recognize that there are cases where having some power, for example, we have power over, you know, psychopaths who want to kill everybody. We put them in prison. We exercise power over them. So
Yeah.
it's not that we're not oppressing a child. We're not oppressing people we put in prison. In my view, it's not an oppression really. It's an exercise of power and a just one. So not every exercise of power is immediately unjust. I found
Yeah.
these examples kind of helpful too, but it's
Yeah. Good.
striking.
Yeah.
It's striking because people will object to what I just said. I find people who will object to what I just said. They will say, no, no, these kinds of power are only because there is a cultural environment that, in some sense, does not allow for the freedom that we would obtain in a non-capitalist, a non, I don't know, insert whatever you want society. So we've been indoctrinated into thinking about these forms of power are,
Yeah. 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 Like what? Yeah. What if we just like got rid of the police and no security. We provide no security at all, but we convert to socialism. Then all the criminals will become nice people and they'll start cooperating and they won't murder people anymore. Yeah, that's ridiculous. The people who are saying that, I think, they're not like thinking seriously. They're not trying to seriously describe reality. That's not the way that works. Psychopathy is mostly genetic and it is incurable. And these are not just misunderstood people. They're not just people who were mistreated as children. They are people who are literally incapable of understanding morality. They cannot empathize. They're incapable. They didn't just choose, they are unable to empathize with other people. And there's something like 1 to 3% of the population. And if you let them go, they will just wreak havoc on society. And the only thing that will stop them is force. And I'm not saying that because I love exercising force. I hate exercising force. I do not like to fight with people. I don't like, I never fight with people. But those people, like the psychopaths, and like 3% of the population can cause a lot of harm. And like those people will just destroy everything if there isn't someone to stop them.
okay. What would you say about somebody about to criticize you in saying you've made a book about progressive myths, but what about conservative myths? Why are you not
Yeah.
addressing conservative myths?
Yeah. Yeah. And, like I said in the introduction of the book, something about that. But yeah, I thought like, what are the conservative myths? Well, there are things like the 2020 election was stolen, right? Like, I guess that's a conservative myth. Or global warming is a hoax, right? There's the people who think that it's not happening at all. There's nothing happening. Um, like, why did I not write a book about that? Well, first, because like, there's only so much you can put in one book, right? And I guess I was more bothered by the progressive myths, right? And like psychologically, that's partly because I live in the academic world. And in my world, you really, really don't hear these conservative myths. Like you hear people making fun of them, okay? And when the odd time that you hear somebody make a conservative comment, it's refreshing because it's been so rare that you heard that, even if they're wrong. Like if somebody in my class was like, go Trump. If one of my colleagues came out as a Trump supporter, it would be refreshing, even though I would think he was sadly wrong. But anyway, okay, but also like, you know, the progressive myths are like it looks to me like they fit together as a concerted systematic attack on our society. Like they're trying to convince people of this overall story that our society is evil and unjust and we need to like burn it down or something like that. And then the conservative myth is like, oh, there's no global warming. Like, okay, that's not an attack on our society. You're just like not you're just like not getting this scientific results. Well, I guess you could say though it's like an attack on science,
Yeah,
right?
well,
But
because
yeah,
in academia, the view that, of course, you know very well is actually that the way more important myths are the conservative myths, the way more damaging ones are the conservative myths. And a lot of people in academia will say, look, there are some things that academia gets wrong, but if I talk about them, if I put the spotlight on them, I'm being unproductive. I'm not going to be productive to society as a whole. And so we should just focus on shining a bright light on the conservative myths, but by the way, are way more damaging. And we brush under the table a bit all the other stuff. A lot of academics will be. I feel like. Do you think a lot of do you get colleagues that are angry at you sometimes because you're very opinionated, or do they judge you
well,
because of your views?
I mean, if they're mad, they haven't expressed it. Uh, maybe they're maybe they're secretly thinking that humor is a joke, but they want to keep peace, so they're not going to say it. But no, but I mean, like the academic analytic philosophy culture is sort of pro argument. And so like and I think this is different from some of the other humanities and social sciences. Like if you don't agree with what somebody said, then that's an invitation to argue with them. And I think like the left-wing idea maybe in other fields is like that's an invitation to condemn the person. And so like I've gotten a pretty good reception in philosophy. Now, I don't know. There might be people who hate me and they're not saying it. And there might be people who are like not inviting me to talk when they would have otherwise because of my political views and they're not saying that. That's totally possible. But like nobody's just like being openly an asshole as far as I know. Oh, but okay. But yeah, about like, oh, are the conservative myths more damaging? Like, well, I don't see why. The other thing that I wanted to say is that, okay, you know, the right wing and especially Trump is a greater threat to the country in the short term. Meaning like like rejecting election results and trying to actually overturn them. Like that's actually a near-term threat. Like, I do not know what would have happened to America if Mike Pence had done exactly what Trump wanted. But it would have been like, that's like getting the neighborhood of civil war, okay? But the thing is like the most of the craziness on the right is like I think is temporary. And I think that so Trump is like whatever he is, 78 years old. He's gonna die within 10 years, probably. Anyway, I
Hmm.
don't know. But like when he's gone, um, I think most of the craziness will go away. But the left has been like they've controlled these cultural institutions for decades, and they're controlling what people are taught in high school and college. And they're just and like, they're controlling the movies that we watch and television shows that we watch. And so they're just dominating the culture. And like after Trump dies, they're not going to stop.
Hmm.
They will still have control. Like whatever, after Joe Biden dies,
Hmm.
the left will still have control and they will still be doing this propaganda.
Actually, I have a different intuition here because I feel like so one of the reasons, for example, that both Jordan Peterson and Elon Musk endorsed Trump, it's because there is this growing craziness on the right too. I think there are these two balls of craziness that are growing, and I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure that after a Trump, because hmm, I get the impression that social media is. Some of the messaging of the right is way more direct than the messaging on the left, and it doesn't require contorting yourself in weird mental gymnastics in some cases, or to hate your own country. But but to love your own country, that comes very easy in a way.
Yes.
And if you push that kind of message, like love your own country more than any other country, and don't think about anything else, this populist ethos that is growing and growing on the right, that the elites, the institutions are bad, they're corrupt. I don't know if this is just a Trump phenomenon. I don't know if it comes from philosophy or if it's based on some actual myths or if it's just something that is intrinsically more pleasurable for humans to fall into in a way. Because we have, of course, historically, examples of people falling into this kind of right-wing populism in pretty disastrous ways.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if I
Yeah.
share.
Okay.
I'm not sure I'm share your intuitions. One thing I would
Yeah.
say is that these two balls have to stop because
Yeah.
because
Yeah. Yeah.
because people are looking because people only look at what happens in the extreme of the other party. I've noticed this. Like people are only talking about what goes on in the extreme of the other party, and they see
Yes.
themselves as these demons essentially.
Okay, good. Yeah. Well, okay, so that brings up like the appeal of the populist right is maybe it's appealing to our instincts, right?
Yeah,
Like I think it's plausible that there's an anti-foreign bias that's just sort of like genetically programmed in us. And there are probably good reasons for that, right? Because like in human history, it was common that people from another tribe would actually kill you.
yeah.
Like if they got a whole if if they catch you away from your tribe, then they might actually just murder you. Um, but okay, and the left isn't really appealing to our myths. So then you might think, oh, well, maybe the right is more dangerous because they're appealing to dangerous tendencies that normal people already have. Um, but I think this brings up another reason why I want to focus on the progressive myths, which is that I thought that the incorrect left-wing ideas are in fact based on incorrect information. Like the reason why people would become leftists is that they heard these things that seem persuasive that these might be the objective sort of scientific facts, and they believed it, and then they correctly inferred. Okay. And then that isn't what happened to the right-wing people. And so like with the right-wing people, if I debunk their myths, they're still going to have that point of view because like they just have an instinct of distrust of foreigners. It wasn't really that they bought into some like false statistic that somebody told them.
Okay, that's fair. That's extremely interesting point of view. In the sense you're saying that the left has the left should criticize itself more because it's going to be the people who are more responsive to critique. While yeah, it's more intrinsic when it comes to the problems on the right.
Yeah.
Which in some cases is quite an accusation to the right wingers in a way. I mean, not an accusation,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, I mean, like right-wing people are going to like this book because it's mostly about
yeah,
how left-wing people are wrong. But like, one of the people who reviewed it, like the first reviewers said that basically the reason humor isn't doing conservative myths is that the conservative myths are too dumb. Like, like, the global warming is a hoax and the 2020 election is stolen. Like, those are just too dumb for me to have to debunk.
okay,
And I didn't put it that way, but I did kind of say like those don't seem to me to need as much debunking because they aren't persuasive on their face. Just like it, it shouldn't sound to you like those are objective facts.
Okay. So I can't resist. I can't resist it. Mm, in an ANCAP, so maybe we should first just say that you're an ANCAP, which means that your actually desired society would be anarcho-capitalism.
Yeah.
Um, and one of the ways,
Yeah. Read my other book, The
yeah,
Problem of Political Authority.
okay, which to be honest, it's a very, very out there view in the sense that not a lot of the people endorse that view. So, one of the ways people think there's a problem of it is that who is going to, adjudicate litigations between people? So, who is going to be the legislative branch? Who is going to play the role of the legislative branch in that kind of society? And I can't resist challenging you there because one of your answers is that there's going to be private adjudicators of conflict
Yeah.
in society who are going to kind of wield force. They're going to The force is not going to be centralized in one government, but it's going to be diffuse in these bodies that are going to be private bodies that wield force. Is that correct? As a
Right.
summary
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
your views, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I don't understand how you can think that these bodies are not going to immediately create conflict. Like as soon as people have the capacity, what I mean is like actual agents and pistols and guns, and this force is diffused with these people who I guess they're going to be um, hierarchical in nature, these firms who adjudicate things. So there's going to be these policemen with, I know somebody's going to have 10,000 of them, some other guy's going to have 1,000 of them. And why is the guy who has I don't know 10,000 policemen under him at a certain point
Yeah.
not think I'm going to like just conquer the next
Yeah.
people and
So
hmm?
yeah. So just as a background point, like policing and adjudication are two separate functions, and most anarcho-capitalists envision distinct sets of firms. So there's a set of firms that do policing work, for hire, and they're competing with each other. So we replace the government police, the private police. And then, there's other firms that do adjudication because that's a very different service. And they could be multiple of those that are competing with each other. So, okay, well, so why do the police firms not fight with each other? And like the basic short answer is because that's not profitable, because it costs a lot of money. And it's cheaper to resolve your disputes by going to an arbitrator. So, and that's true even if your firm is larger than the other firm. Okay. But, and, like, I think also you have to think realistically, like, imagine that there are people who are like the people that you're familiar with. Okay. So, like, a friend of yours says, hey, I got this job for the security agency. Okay. And then, like, imagine that the next day he tells you, "So my boss has said that we're going to war against another security agency, and he wants me to go over to one of their offices and start shooting their guards." What do you think is the next thing that happens? And I anticipate the next thing that happens is my friend says, "So I'm looking for another job." I mean, because I'm not going to risk my life actually for my boss. I'm not going to commit murders for him, and I'm also not going to be subject to being murdered. Right now, okay, now you do have to take into account that these are people who signed up to be security guards, so they're more willing to exert force, right? But exerting force against a private, just like a criminal, is different from going against another whole agency. Right. And also like because the agency is competing with you in business, like that's different from
Hmm.
because this criminal is trying to rob somebody's house.
No, but yeah, you're right. I think that's a great objection to my objection. But the way I envision it happening is that through time, these groups are going to form some kind of ideology. I think it's some of the reasons why in tribal-like communities, tribes tend to go to war with each other. Like, unfortunately, in the state of nature, us humans, we like war a lot. And
Yeah.
it's something that's very
Yeah. We
unfortunate.
love
And
war.
yeah,
Yeah.
But it seems to
Yeah.
happen a lot, and it seems like as soon as you have these groups of people who have force, there's some charismatic leader that comes up that says, "Look, if we just conquer that other town or whatever place, there's going to be a lot of reward for us, and it's right according to moral reasons, according to religious reasons."
Yeah.
It strikes me as something that is likely to happen if we diffuse force in this way. And one, maybe it's Hobbesian on my part to think that the only reason we're not warring each other is that there's the monopoly on violence is held by the state. But intuitively, I'm very skeptical.
Yeah.
Do you have
Yeah. I mean, well, I mean, like one thing you should wonder is, oh, well, why wouldn't that problem happen with government? So because, that's also a group of people, and then the government is this group of people that has even more power.
no? But
And
it
so
does. It
then,
does. The government goes to
okay,
war with other governments.
yeah, we call it war. And then like, well, actually literally tens of millions of people were killed over the last century because of that. Okay, so then you could ask, oh, well, so which would be more common, I guess, which is the bigger problem? Or like, are you more it's really sort of like a difference of scale, like because like, oh, we both agree that there should be some kind of power that somebody needs power to stop criminals. Okay, so it's just like, should it be a really big power that's monopolistic, or should it be a larger number of smaller powers that compete with each other? Okay. And so, but my claim is like, well, like part of the reason why war happens is that the people who are deciding whether to go to war don't face the consequences. So like if George W. Bush, um, if he was in danger of being shot at when he invaded Iraq, I don't think he would have made it. And but also like if he was losing money, like if he had to pay for it, or like if he owned the company that had to pay for it, I don't think he would have gone. Then you think, okay, so is that different from the private protection agency? Yeah, the private protection agencies are trying to make money, and like if they're deciding to go to war, then they're going to pay that, and they can't just say, well, we're just going to raise prices, or like the government can just say, well, we're just going to force people to pay more taxes to pay for the war. But like if a private company says that, then a bunch of customers say, okay, well, we're finding another finding another agency, right? They're just going to go to their competitors.
Okay. So last thing, I don't want to challenge you. I mean, I would love to challenge you more on this, but I've already robbed too much of your time. The last question is, do you have any questions for me or?
Uh, uh, I don't know. Not especially.
Okay.
But like this was a great conversation.
Oh, it was lovely. Well, thank you for having it, and thank you, by the way, for for being so public with your views. I think I don't know, it's beautiful for people who love philosophy to have a philosopher who is as renowned as you are talking to people on the internet and putting videos out. So thank you, I guess, not only from me but for other people who love philosophy. I'm sure they would say the same. And
Oh yeah, well, thanks for having me. I
yeah,
mean,
and for me
you
personally,
know, it's fun that I became a philosopher because I like to talk about philosophy. So
it
yeah,
shows. It shows. Yeah, it shows a lot.
yeah, I chose well, and like the podcasters who interview me are helping me do that. So thanks.